In 1826 in Vienna, two composers living less than 2 miles apart completed what may be two of the greatest string quartets ever written. One was Ludwig van Beethoven, finishing his C-sharp minor quartet opus 131, a work Igor Stravinsky called a perfect miracle of construction. But just across town, another composer was doing something miraculous as well. Born and bred in Vienna and often cited as the true son of Vienna, Franz Schubert was quietly crafting his own masterpiece, the string quartet in G major, Deutsch 887. By then he had written nearly 1,500 works, 600 of them before he turned 21, yet fewer than 10% were published during his lifetime. He would die at 31, having had only one public concert devoted to his own music 8 months before his death. The G major quartet belongs to his final and most revered creative burst between 1824 and 1828, the same astonishing period that gave us the Rosamunda and Death and the Maiden quartets, the octet, the piano trios, and the cello quintet. If the cello quintet is an expansive lyrical universe of spiritual transcendence, the G major is something else entirely, monumental in scope, harmonically daring, and earth-shattering in its power. By the time Schubert was 25, his health had begun to unravel. He had contracted syphilis, a diagnosis that carried both physical suffering and deep social stigma. Even as a child, people sensed that Schubert's world was inward and vast. A schoolmate once described him as quiet, kind, and deeply spiritual. Someone who rarely laughed, but who would suddenly smile as if responding to some secret joy known only to himself. As he grew older, those inner contrasts sharpened. Friends recalled flashes of temper and even moments of violence, breaking dishes in bars and restaurants or storming out of gatherings. But what makes Schubert remarkable isn't the chaos. It's his most fascinating trait of being someone who embodied a web of contradictions, but found a way to harmonize these opposing qualities both personally and artistically. Beneath his inward demeanor, he was shy yet confident, solitary yet overflowing with empathy, fragile yet driven by an artistic clarity that never wavered. Music had somehow provided a moral, artistic, and spiritual compass for him. And in one of his spectacular bursts of creative energy, he wrote the G major quartet, a 45-minute journey of epic proportions, in just 10 days. 4 movements, a lifetime condensed into music. Let's take a closer look. The first movement opens like this. The G major quartet begins with 5 bars that hold everything: the core motives, the harmonic tension, the emotional world to come. Right away, Schubert reveals his duality, light and dark, expressed in the simplest musical terms: the clash of major and minor triads. G major turns to G minor in the first breath, and suddenly the ground shifts. Here, the very first 2 chords. There's another detail hidden in these opening bars. In a typical classical phrase, you'd expect a short, long pattern, a balanced musical sentence. But Schubert flips the proportions: long, short. 5 bars followed by another 5 bars, followed by 4. It's a small structural shift, yet it immediately unsettles the sense of balance. Within just 14 bars, Schubert's imagination, harmonic exploration, and emotional volatility comes through. Then an element of the ancient enters into the context of something new, the lamento bass line. a slow, stepwise descent that dates back to the early 1600s, famously used by Monteverdi. Notice the repeating bass line. That steady downward pull, the sound of sorrow itself, carries with it centuries of grief and beauty. Schubert revives it here not as an imitation, but like a memory. This type of lament typically took the pattern of a chromatic descent of a fourth or a four-note stepwise descending motive that was steady and unarticulated. Here's Schubert's version in the cello. And how he puts it together. The second theme feels something like Schubert might have hummed to himself, lost in thought. It circles gently around a single note, simple, lyrical, and full of Viennese charm. At first it might sound repetitive, but listen closely. Each return is slightly more evolved. The phrasing, the ornaments, the rhythm, all subtly varied. Just take a look at some of the ways he varies this theme in this section with articulations, embellishments, and rhythmic displacements. This is Schubert's signature kind of development. Where Beethoven breaks his themes apart to rebuild them, Schubert lets his ideas grow with a bit of magic dust, expanding them through repetition and transformation. As our colleague at Harvard, Professor Susanna Clark, points out, the G major quartet treats major and minor as equals, not opposites, but partners. We hear it from the very start. G major answered immediately by G minor, and when the opening returns at the recapitulation, Schubert transforms everything. The violent dotted rhythms have softened, the haunting tremolos become rolling triplets, and the tension gives way, seeking consolation. Most striking of all, he reverses the order of those triads. What began as G major followed by G minor now unfolds the other way around, as if to say that both worlds, light and dark, deserve to begin this story. The volatility of this duality reaches its peak at the very end of this movement. Major, minor, and finally, perhaps with courage borrowed from Beethoven, he lands definitively on G major. Sealed with the grandeur of a French overture, the same gesture that opened the movement now transformed into a final affirmation. The second movement shifts the tonal center down a minor third, from G to E minor. Structurally, it's simple, but it oscillates between two contrasting sections that reveals two very different windows into his world. The first offers a melody that seems to come straight from the heart. It carries that unmistakable Schubertian tenderness, sweetness touched by sorrow, a quiet soul trying to find grace in a world of misery. From that gentle lyricism, the music suddenly turns volatile, a disturbing eruption. It's as if the calm surface of Schubert's inner world has cracked open, and for a moment we are staring deep into his darkest corners. Knowing the stories of his sudden bursts of anger and even violence, we can almost sense that same turmoil here. The music is gripped by fear and fury, a desperate lashing out against something unseen. What's remarkable about this section is how much of it echoes the opening of the quartet. You can hear the same G modality, the jagged dotted rhythms in fortissimo, the fragmented triads, all intensified to the breaking point. Harmonically, Schubert indulges one of his favorite pastimes, motion by minor thirds. G minor, E minor, C sharp minor, B flat minor, and back again. And through it all, he keeps screaming that minor third, G to B flat, like a desperate, relentless cry. Amid this turmoil, there are two very subtle moments that I truly believe thread to the last movement. All I'll do now is simply point them out, but I'll come back to them later on. First, a group of 4 notes in the cello: E, D sharp, C sharp, G sharp. Notes that easily fly under the radar. And second, his use of a canon, first between the cello and second violin, then between the first violin and cello. Just a side note here. Schubert studied intensively with Antonio Salieri between 1808 and 1813. Salieri trained him in the Italian partimento tradition, a system that was built on figured and unfigured bass lines. In that world, the canon was considered a hallmark of mastery, a test of both intellect and imagination. Schubert had actually already shown a fascination with imitation before studying with Salieri, but this training deepened it into something profoundly expressive. Although the movement ends with a sense of closure, the music doesn't entirely rest without its ghosts. In the cello's quiet, falling minor third, we hear the lingering echo of terror, a reminder that the shadows in Schubert's world never fully disappear. By the time we arrive at the third movement, we are ready for some relief, and we find it here in the scherzo. As so often is the case in Schubert's scherzos, the trio section is absolutely precious. Ländler-like in its gentle dance rhythm, the cello's repeated Bs opens a doorway to a place far, far away, a place where the quiet circle of peace, bliss, and comfort embraces us like a newly discovered oasis in a world of pain. Schubert often ends his works with a kind of obsessive energy. Think of the Tarantella finale and the Death of the Maiden. The last movement of the G major carries a similar perpetual energy, but that energy constantly shifts between many different guises: daring, defiant, playful, jolly, rollicking. Even its main theme, with its familiar tension between major and minor, holds contradiction. You'll also notice the sheer density of repeated notes, that relentless pulse driving the music forward. It's as if the energy begins to feed on itself, spinning faster, becoming an unstoppable force. As Dieter Schnabel observed, the repeated notes and tremolos are the secret content of the work. Amid this whirlwind, there are two moments when the music suddenly steps back from its obsessive drive. The first rises with a kind of noble defiance. The music lifts its chest, holds its head high, and for a moment stands tall in its own strength. The second seemingly comes out of nowhere. Remember those two subtle threads that I mentioned connect the slow movement to the finale? The first comes from that moment of terror in the second movement, the cello's trembling line moving E, D sharp, C sharp, G sharp. Here in the finale, the second violin takes those exact notes but in retrograde. The past returns, reversed, transformed. The second thread is born from the canon, that echoing imitation that appears so beautifully in the slow movement. A canon, of course, is a melody repeated after a delay. For example, Row, Row, Row Your Boat is a canon. The thing is, there's something unique about the canon. For example, imagine if Row, Row, Row Your Boat went on forever. Schubert understood something profound about this type of imitation. When voices chase one another endlessly, time begins to dissolve. Repetition becomes an entirely different temporal experience. At the height of the final movement, he wields this idea with breathtaking force. The quartet is in triple forte, caught in a desperate struggle to break free from the tug of war between major and minor, hammering away at B flat to A to B flat to A to B natural to B flat to A, until at last that B natural bursts through, signaling the triumph of G major. And the one instrument that leads us there, the voice that finally delivers resolution, the viola. Upon his deathbed, Franz Schubert had one final musical request. That was to hear Opus 131 before his time was up. It's as if he turned towards his hero one last time for courage to face his final days. When I think about it, the only reason such masterpieces could coexist 2 miles apart from each other is because they came from utterly different people. Beethoven wrestled with fate driven by an unshakable belief in the noble and the moral purpose of humankind. Schubert, on the other hand, turned inward. His battles were fought in silence, in the fragile sanctuaries of the soul. Yes, it was complex, yes, it was miserable, and yes, it was filled with much sorrow. He even once said, "Pain sharpens the understanding and strengthens the mind." Unlike Beethoven, Schubert did not seek to vanquish his struggles. He learned not to fear them. He learned to live with them and to let them shape who he was. They may have lived in the same city, but they inhabited worlds entirely unknown to each other. Schubert's G major quartet unfolds with a rhetoric unlike any other, one that mirrors the depths of our own psyche. Within its shifting light and shadow, we can each find something of ourselves: sympathy, warmth, hope, or a tenderness that dissolves the heart. It endures as a monument not merely of music, but of the hidden self. For it traces with trembling honesty what Dietrich Schnabel so beautifully called the seismography of inner life.